The winter of 1887 came early to Montana Territory, pressing down from the northern ranges like a hand that meant to stay. In the frozen backcountry east of the Bitterroot, where the pines stood close and the trails between settlements could swallow a man whole in a single bad storm, a transaction took place that no court had sanctioned and no decent soul would have permitted. A man sold his sister. Not her labor, not her time. Her. 25 years old, 7 months along with a child she had already begun to love, wrapped in her dead mother's wool coat that would no longer close across her belly. He sold her for $40 and the erasure of a gambling debt, and he did not meet her eyes when the coins changed hands. Her name was June Turner Hale. She had buried her husband the previous winter and had nowhere left to go but her brother's roof. She had cooked for him, mended for him, kept his house through cold she felt in her bones, and he had decided that was not enough, or rather, that she was worth more disappeared than present. The men who bought her were not looking for a cook. A solitary line rider named Caleb Ross was patrolling the winter range when he found blood on the snow. He was a man who had lived alone long enough that he had stopped expecting the world to surprise him. He was wrong. He followed the blood. This is their story, a tale of a woman the world tried to price and dispose of, and the man who understood that saving her meant never once treating her as something he had earned. June had learned early that silence was safer than speech. She had been 12 when her mother died, 14 when her father stopped recognizing her name, 16 when she began keeping house for men who expected more from her than they ever said plainly. She had married Thomas Hale at 22 because he was kind, and because kindness, in her experience, did not come offered twice. He built them a 2-room cabin near the eastern range. He was quiet, careful with his words, and he died in February of a fever that moved faster than anything either of them could have predicted. After Thomas, there was only Eli. She had told herself it would be temporary. Eli's roof until the child came, until she could get on her feet, until she could think past the grief that sat in her chest like a stone she carried everywhere. She did not like the way he looked at her growing belly, not with tenderness, not even with awkwardness, but with calculation, the way a man looks at a problem he has not yet solved. She had seen him counting money at the table one night, his face tight, his mouth moving with numbers she could not hear. She had not asked. She had told herself it was not her business. That was the last mistake she made in that house. The morning they left, Eli said they were going to visit a freight camp 2 days east, that a man there owed him wages. He said it quickly, looking at the wall above her head. He said the trail was good, the weather would hold. He said she should bring her things in case they stayed a few days. She brought her things, the coat that had been her mother's, a spare dress, the small Bible Thomas had given her on their wedding day, its spine worn soft from the years she had carried it. She left behind almost everything else because almost everything else had already been taken from her in one form or another, and she had learned not to hold on so tight to things that could be lost. The clearing was a day's ride from anything she recognized. Pine trees stood in a ring like witnesses that had decided long ago not to interfere. The snow had been packed hard by previous traffic, wagon wheels and boot prints going in all directions, the kind of place men stopped when they did not want to be seen from the road. Eli reined the horse to a stop and told her to wait while he went ahead to speak with someone. She waited. She had always been good at waiting. 3 men emerged from the tree line. They were dressed in heavy leather coats and moved with the unhurried ease of people who expected to get what they came for. One of them was older, gray at the temples, his eyes doing a kind of accounting as they passed over her. The other 2 were younger and said nothing. Eli spoke quickly. Depths, bad luck, a run of cards that had gone wrong and kept going wrong. The words came out practiced, as if he had told the story enough times to stop feeling it. The older man interrupted, his gaze settling on June's belly. That wasn't mentioned. Eli shrugged. She works, always has. The word landed the way a door slamming shut, lands final and without apology. June felt something go still inside her, the way water goes still before it freezes. She did not move. She did not speak. She had learned that neither tended to help. Coins passed from one set of hands to another. The sound was small, almost polite. One of the younger men produced a rope. She did not fight it. Not then. The rope was around her wrist before she had made a decision, and she understood in that moment the way a cold truth settles in, slowly, then all at once, that she had not been brought here to be consulted. She had been brought here to be transferred. The older man stepped closer and studied her the way you study livestock. His eyes moved to her face last, as if it were the least relevant part. She ride quiet? She knows better, Eli said. June closed her eyes. Somewhere beneath her ribs, in the warmth she had been careful to protect through all of it, the cold nights, the long silences, the grief, something stirred. The kick came hard. Not the rolling motion she had grown accustomed to, those small reassurances in the night that she was not entirely alone. This was different, sharp, insistent, a fist against the inside of her, small and furious. Pain moved through her like a current, and underneath the pain something else, a word, single and clear and steady as a coal that won't go out. No, the wagon lurched. One of the wheels had found a buried rut in the frozen ground, and the whole frame shuddered sideways. The rope at her wrists went slack for half a second, just half, and June did not wait for the second half. She ran. The forest took her fast, pines closing ranks, branches tearing at her coat, the ground rising and falling in ways she could not predict in the dark beneath the canopy. Behind her she heard cursing, then boots, then the sharp crack of a whip against cold air. Someone laughed, the short, startled laugh of a man who expects to catch what he is chasing. She ran anyway. Her ankle turned on something buried under the snow, and she went down hard, mouth full of ice and pine needles, and she came up again before she had finished falling, one hand on a branch, one arm around her belly. She did not stop. "I hear you," she whispered into the cold. Her breath came in ragged pieces. "I'm going, I promise." The rope still trailed from one wrist. She tore it loose on a branch without slowing. Blood soaked through her stocking where the ankle had twisted wrong, leaving a trail she could not help and could not think about. Each step grew heavier. The cold stopped being something she felt and became something she was made of. She ran until running became stumbling, and stumbling became crawling, and then the ground simply fell away beneath her. A ravine dropping down fast and dark through the trees, and June went with it. She hit the bottom hard enough to lose the air from her chest. She lay still for a long moment, the sky a thin, pale strip far above, the trees leaning over it like they were listening. She curled one arm around her belly, still there. Far above her through the trees she thought she saw a light, small and amber, distant and wavering. It might have been real. It might have been what the mind makes in the last cold minutes before it stops making things. She pressed her forehead into the snow. "Freedom," she whispered, "or I'd die trying." The snow fell soft and steady, covering the blood she had left behind her, smoothing the ground as if it meant to erase her entirely. June's breath slowed. The cold wrapped around her the way a blanket wraps around a person, fully, without exception. If death came for her here, it would come quietly. She was not afraid of that. She was afraid of what it would come for first. Caleb Ross had been riding Winter Range long enough that the land spoke to him in a language most men never bothered to learn. He was not a large man, not loud, not the kind of figure that drew attention in a room. He was lean and deliberate in his movements, the way men get when they have spent too many winters alone and have had to account for every bit of energy they spend. His horse was a gray mare named Ida, who trusted him because he had never given her reason not to. That was about the best accounting he could make of most of his relationships. He dismounted at the edge of the timber when Ida stopped and would not be pressed forward. He crouched in the snow and brushed aside the top layer with his gloved hand. Blood, red dark, recent enough that the cold had not finished stealing its color. A thin line of it, then a smear, then a handprint in the snow where someone had caught themselves falling. He read the signs around it the way he would read weather in the sky. Boots, small, lighter than a man's. Branches broken low, bark scraped raw where someone had caught hold coming down a slope, and behind those prints deeper in the snow, the marks of heavier boots. Multiple sets. Moving fast. Someone had run into this forest because what was behind them felt worse than what was in front of them. Caleb followed without hurrying, letting his eyes move over the ground rather than searching it. You found things faster when you let them come to you. The ravine was steep enough that he had to find his way down sideways, boots testing each step. At the bottom, in the gray light that filtered through pine and cloud, he saw her. She lay half buried in drifted snow, one arm wrapped around her middle, the other stretched out as if she had been reaching for something when she went down. Her coat was torn at the shoulder. Her wrists bore the raw red marks of rope. One ankle was dark with blood, the cloth frozen stiff around it. She was pregnant. 7 months, maybe more, her belly round and still beneath the arm she had not let go of even in unconsciousness. Caleb's chest tightened, his hands did not. He knelt beside her and found her pulse, faint, slow, but present. He checked her breathing, shallow. He checked the position of the child, pressing 2 fingers gently, feeling for movement, there, slow and faint, but there. He did not speak. Words could wait. When he lifted her, she weighed nearly nothing, which meant she had been going without for some time before tonight. He carried her out of the ravine and up to where Ida waited, patient and still, and he settled June across the saddle in front of him with one arm around her and the other hand on the rein. He rode back to the line shack without stopping. Inside, he built the fire higher than he had in years. He laid her near the hearth on his own blankets and stripped the frozen coat and boots and wet stockings carefully, not carelessly, replacing them with dry wool. He cleaned the ankle wound with water heated over the fire and wrapped it tight. He cleaned the rope burns at her wrists and covered them with clean cloth. He did not look at her longer than was needed to do the work. When she stirred, her eyes opening, slow and scared, her whole body pulling away before she was fully awake, he stepped back and gave her the room. "You're safe," he said. She searched his face the way someone searches for the catch in a thing that sounds too good. Her eyes moved to her wrists, to the clean bandages there, to the fire, to the door, to him. "I didn't steal anything," she said. Her voice was thin, but her chin did not tremble. Caleb looked at her steadily. "I didn't ask." She watched him for another moment. He did not move toward her. He crossed to the table and ladled stew into a bowl and set it within reach of where she lay, then stepped back again to his side of the room. "You can rest," he said. "No one will come through that door tonight." He kept his word. He sat by the fire through the long hours of the night, his back against the wall and his rifle across his knees, and he let her sleep. June woke slowly, the way you wake after nearly not waking at all, uncertain first of what was real, then uncertain of where real was, then finally, piece by piece, letting it settle. Heat, real and deep and steady, not the desperate kind she had been hoarding against the cold for days. The smell of wood smoke and something rich and savory that her body moved toward before her mind had finished thinking. Silence that was not absence, not the silence of people who had stopped speaking because there was nothing worth saying, but something fuller, the silence of a place where no one needed to perform. She sat up slowly. Her ankle ached. Her wrists were wrapped in clean cloth. The coat that had been her mother's hung near the fire on a peg, drying. Caleb Ross sat at the table with his back partly to her, working a strip of leather through his hands with the unhurried focus of a man who did not feel the need to fill time with noise. He did not turn immediately when she moved. He waited, she understood, because he was giving her the chance to look at him before he looked at her. She used the time. He was older than she had thought in the dark, maybe 40, maybe a few years past. The kind of face that kept its age in the lines around the eyes and the set of the jaw rather than in anything softer. His hands were calloused and certain, the hands of a man who fixed things rather than replaced them. He turned when she was ready. His eyes were gray, and they looked at her directly without looking at her in the way she had learned to brace for. "Where am I?" she asked. "My line shack. You're safe." She studied him a moment longer. Then, because it had become reflex, the first thing she said to anyone who found her in a compromised position, the statement she led with before anyone could construct a story about her. "I didn't steal anything. I didn't ask," he said again. He rose and brought her the bowl of stew, set it within her reach, and sat back down at the table without crowding her. She ate carefully at first, the way you eat when you have learned that food can be withheld, then with more urgency as her body remembered what it needed. When she finished, she rested her hand on her belly, movement faint but steady. She let out a breath she had been holding for longer than she could account for. "The child's father died last winter," she said. It was not something she had intended to say. It came out simply because it was the most essential thing. The fact that organized all the other facts, that explained the coat, the brother's roof, the rope. Caleb nodded once. He did not ask how. He did not fill the space after with questions or with the particular kind of sympathy that is really just curiosity dressed up. "My name's June," she said. "Caleb," he answered. That was all they needed for now. Later, when she had lain back against the blankets and sleep was pulling at the edges of her again, she noticed the cradle. It sat near the hearth, pushed slightly to one side, its lines careful and deliberate, one edge marked with the dark scar of old fire. It had been built by someone who knew what they were doing, who had taken time with the joints and the smoothing, who had expected it to hold something precious. It was unfinished. She did not ask about it, but she looked at it for a long time before she closed her eyes. Outside, the wind pressed at the walls and found no purchase. Inside, the fire held. Caleb did not hover. That was the first thing she noticed about him as the days passed. The way he moved through his own space without making her feel like she was being watched in it. He brought her food before she thought to ask for it. He added wood to the fire without comment. When she was steady enough to sit up at the table, he set a cup of strong coffee beside her without asking if she wanted it, and she did, and he seemed to have known she would. He never stood between her and the door. She had learned to read men through their habits rather than their words, and his habits told her something she did not yet fully trust. He was not building a ledger. He was not counting what he had done for her against what he would eventually expect in return. He simply did the next necessary thing and moved on. One morning she came to the table and found him mending a boot with steady, practiced hands. He did not look up. "Your ankle needs walking," he said, "not hard. Just enough to keep the joint from stiffening." She walked to the door and back. Twice her ankle ached but held. He did not watch her do it. That evening, while she was folding the extra blanket he had given her, not because she had been told to, simply because her hands needed something to do, he spoke without looking up from the knife he was sharpening. "My wife died in a storm like this one," he said. His voice was even, but it cost something. She could hear the cost. 7 years ago she was in labor. I rode out to get help, and the pass closed behind me. By the time Abigail and I got back, he stopped. She did not fill the silence. He said, "The cradle was the only thing left when I got the fire out. One side of it had caught." June looked at the cradle by the fire. She had been looking at it for days without knowing what she was seeing. "I kept it," he said, "because I couldn't figure out what else to do with a thing I'd built, expecting something that never got to use it." She understood that kind of keeping. The Bible in her bundle had Thomas's handwriting in the margins, small, careful notes he had made over years of reading it. She had not opened it since he died. She carried it anyway. "That's not a grave," she said quietly. "It's a door you haven't opened yet." Caleb was still for a moment. Then he set down the knife. He didn't say anything else that night, but in the morning when she woke, he had moved the cradle closer to the fire. Not a lot. A foot, maybe 2. Enough to notice. She noticed. Small things accumulated the way snow accumulates, not in any single moment, but in the accumulation of many quiet moments until you look up and find yourself under something altogether different from what you started with. He repaired a split in her boot sole without being asked and left the boot by the door. She found his extra coat folded near her bed one cold morning when the fire had gone low in the night. When the baby moved visibly, that hard roll across the surface of her belly that she had gotten used to, but that startled others, he simply watched and said, "Strong," and went back to what he was doing. She had expected him to be uncomfortable with the evidence of her pregnancy. Men usually were. It made her too real. She had found too specifically human in a way that complicated whatever story they preferred about her. Caleb did not seem to need a simplified story. He seemed content to be in the same room with the whole complicated truth of her. She told him about Eli one evening, not everything, not yet, but enough. About the roof she had been grateful for. About the calculation she'd seen in her brother's face in the weeks before the clearing. About the sound of the coins. She said, "I spent my whole life being useful to people who decided useful and worthless were the same thing." Caleb looked at her from across the fire. "They weren't the same thing," he said. "They were just people who needed to believe they were." She turned that over in her mind for a long time afterward. The knock came just after first light. A single hard rap, the kind that announces authority and does not apologize for the hour. Caleb was on his feet before the echo finished. June sat up in the bed, her heart already in her throat, already knowing. She had been waiting for this since she woke in the ravine. She had been waiting for it the whole time she was healing, in the way you wait for a thing you cannot stop but cannot stop thinking about. He crossed to the door and spoke low without opening it. "Stay where you are." He opened it just enough. 3 men outside, their breath fogging in the cold, their coats stiff with ice. June recognized the one in front, one of the men from the clearing, the one who had watched Eli count the money. "We're looking for a woman," he said. "Come through here yesterday or the day before. Pregnant." She may be confused. Caleb's voice was flat as a stone. "Haven't seen anyone." The man's mouth moved sideways. "She's property," he said, "paid for fair and legal." Caleb said, "People aren't property." The second man made a sound between a laugh and a warning. "That's not how the papers read, friend." Caleb said nothing. He stood in the doorway, broad and unhurried, and looked at them until they stopped talking. Then he closed the door. Inside, the air had gone thin. June pressed her hand to her mouth and kept it there. "They'll come back," she said. "Yes." He moved without wasting anything. Blankets lashed to the sled, supplies wrapped against the cold, his rifle loaded and set where he could reach it, but where she would not have to look at it. He helped her into her coat, her repaired boot, an extra pair of his wool stockings over her own. She said, "You don't have to do this. They want me, not you," he said. "They'll look until they find you or until they believe you're dead." She did not argue after that. He settled her on the sled and wrapped her against the cold and took the horse's lead rope and walked out into the storm that had been building since before dawn. She looked back once at the line shack, at the smoke still rising thin from the chimney, at the life he was leaving behind without a word of regret. He did not look back at all. The pass was a hard climb in good weather. In this weather it was something close to unreasonable, and Caleb attempted it anyway, leaning into the wind with his shoulder turned, his feet finding purchase in the snow by memory more than sight. The horse labored. The sled dragged. Halfway up, June cried out. The pain came fast and hard, not the familiar rolling ache she had learned to breathe through, but something sharper. Something that said the body had its own timeline and would not be waiting for circumstances to improve. Caleb stopped. He knelt beside the sled and checked her face, her breathing, the set of her hands where they gripped the blankets. She said through her teeth, "Something's wrong." He said, "We're close." He pulled harder. The cabin appeared out of the white like something remembered rather than found. a low shape with amber light in its windows and smoke rising from the chimney in a thick, confident column that spoke of someone with plenty of wood and no intention of being cold. Caleb knocked once and pushed the door open. An old woman stood at the hearth, gray hair braided tight, her face the kind of face that had seen enough not to be rattled by one more thing. She took in June and the sled, and the state of them both in a single sweeping look, and began moving immediately, clearing space, pulling a chair to the fire, speaking in short practical sentences that required no response. "Caleb," she said without inflection. "Abigail," he said, "you came hard. There was reason enough." She looked at him then, not at June, at him, and her expression shifted into something that was almost mercy. "I can see that," she said. Abigail Mercer had been the only midwife in this stretch of the territory for longer than most of the current settlers had been here. She was not gentle in the sentimental way people sometimes expected. She did not hold hands and murmur comfortable things. She was gentle in the way that counted, which is to say she was accurate and she was present, and she did not flinch at anything. She got June warm and examined her and said the baby was not coming tonight, but coming soon, and that the stress of the past days had moved things along faster than they should have gone. She gave June a tea that tasted of bark and pine, and something sharp that June could not name, and she said drink it, and June drank. There was another man in the cabin, a traveler sheltering from the same storm. A ledger balanced on his knee, his coat hung carefully on a peg. He introduced himself as Judge Alton Price, Circuit Court, and said he hoped he was not intruding. June told him what had happened. She told it plainly, the way she had been rehearsing it since the ravine, not to make herself sympathetic, but to make herself understood. The clearing, the rope, the coins. The words she works always has. The kick inside her that had said no. The blood she had left across a mile of Montana forest. Judge Price set his ledger on his knee and opened it and took out a pen. He said, "Tell me the names." She did. He wrote for a long time. When he finished, he looked up. "What was done to you was unlawful," he said, "and what's been done to other women by the same men, I'd wager, was unlawful as well. This record will stand." June's breath caught in her chest and stayed caught for a moment. She said, "They'll say I consented. They'll say I agreed to work. They have papers." Judge Price closed the ledger. "They have papers," he agreed. "I have a bench. Those are not the same weight." Outside, the storm deepened. Inside, something shifted that could not be unshifted. Caleb spent that night and the next in the chair by the door. He spoke little. When June was awake, he was a steady presence at the edge of the firelight. When she slept, he kept the fire fed. He went outside twice to clear the snow from the door so it would open in the morning. On the second night, Abigail came and sat beside him in the other chair and said nothing for a while, looking at the fire. Then she said, "The first time I couldn't do anything about it." "You understand that?" He was quiet. "I've been doing it over in my head for 7 years, he said. She said, "You'll do it over for the rest of your life if you want to. But doing it over won't change what happened, and it won't change what's happening now." She paused. "You got here in time. That's the shape of tonight." He looked at the fire for a long time. He said, "I know." She nodded once, then stood and went back to check on June. The pain came on the third night. It came the way labor comes, not politely, not with warning, but with a force that was not interested in negotiation. June woke from a light sleep into hard contraction, and Abigail was already there, her hands calm, her voice steady. Caleb had been sitting by the door. He stood. June looked at him from across the room and said, "Don't stand outside it like it's a punishment." He came and sat beside her on the floor, close enough that she could reach him, far enough that she had her own air. She took hold of his coat sleeve when the pain crested. He did not say anything. He did not move away. The storm was at its loudest when it happened, the sound filling the cabin the way sound fills a held breath. And then through all of it came another sound, thin and furious and startlingly alive. Abigail lifted the child and placed her on June's chest, small, red-faced, already loud about it. June broke then. That particular kind of breaking that is not destruction but release, the kind that has been building for months through silence and cold and fear and $40 worth of betrayal. She pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "You're here," she whispered. "You're free." Judge Price wrote the name in his ledger in the morning, June Turner Hale. And the child, Hope Hale, not her brother's name. Not her mother's name, not any man's name, her own. They came down from the pass when the storm broke 3 days later. The world was white and still and startlingly bright, the way the world gets after it has finished saying something loud. Eli Turner was already in the nearest town. He had been there 2 days, telling anyone who would listen that his sister had been taken by a line rider, that she was fragile, that she was not in her right mind since her husband's death, that he was the victim here. The men who had bought her had filed a complaint of a different kind. She had absconded, they said, from a legal labor agreement, and had taken the blanket she was wrapped in, which was technically theft. June walked into the town hall with Hope wrapped against her chest, Caleb on one side, Abigail on the other, and Price's ledger under his arm. The room was not full, but it was full enough. The sheriff, 2 deputies, Eli standing near the wall with his hat in his hands, and the older man from the clearing, the one who had looked at her belly with irritation, seated near the front. Eli saw her, and his face moved through several expressions before settling on something that was trying to be concern. "June," he said, "I've been sick with worry." She looked at him. She said, "You were not." The older man from the clearing rose and said the matter was simple. There was a contract, signed by the woman's legal guardian, transferring her labor obligations, and she had violated the terms by fleeing. Caleb said, "Show me where on that contract she signed." The man said the guardian's signature was sufficient under. Caleb said, "Show me where she signed." There was quiet. Judge Price said, "I'll take that document, please." He read it. He set it on the table. He said, "This is not a labor contract. A labor contract requires the worker's consent. This is a bill of sale, and the selling of persons has been unlawful in this territory since before any of you were born." Eli said, "She's my family. I was trying to make the best of a hard situation." She didn't understand. June stepped forward. She unwrapped one wrist and held it up, still marked with the fading lines of rope. She said, "You put this on me yourself, Eli. Before they loaded me onto the wagon. You put it on me, and you did not look at my face when you did it." The room was quiet. She said, "I was there. I know what happened. I know what you said when they complained about my pregnancy. She works. Always has. That is what you said about your own sister and her unborn child." She paused. $40. That was the number. I want you to hear it said out loud so you know I have been carrying it since the moment you counted it. She put her wrist down. She said, "I ran through a mile of Montana forest in the dark with rope burns on my wrists and blood in my boot and a 7-month child in my belly, and I am standing here. My daughter is alive. And I am telling you what happened in my own words, which is something no one in this room was willing to give me before I ran." Eli opened his mouth. She said, "That is all I need to say." Judge Price looked at the man from the clearing and then at Eli Turner. He said, "I'm ordering both of you held for the circuit court to address charges of human trafficking, coercion, fraudulent documentation, and conspiracy." He looked at the sheriff. "You'll see to it." Eli said, "She's blood. You can't." June said, "Blood doesn't tie your own family's wrists." They took him through the door. He did not look back. She did not watch him go. In the quiet after, she stood with her hand resting on Hope's back, feeling the small rise and fall of her daughter's breathing. Caleb stood a few steps behind her, where he had been standing since they walked in, not in front of her, not between her and the room, just behind, in case she needed him, and close enough to answer if she turned. She turned. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her since the first morning she woke in the line shack, directly, without anything hidden in it, without asking for anything in return. She said, "Thank you." He said, "You did that." She said, "We came together." He said, "Yes, we did." They walked out into the cold and the white and the winter light that had finally decided to stay. Caleb did not assume she was going back to the line shack. That was the thing she kept turning over in the days that followed. Staying at Abigail's cabin with Hope while the legal matter worked itself through the proper channels. The recording of the judgment, the voiding of the fraudulent papers, the formal establishment of the claim her late husband had filed that Eli had been planning to absorb once she disappeared. Caleb came each day. He did not come to press her. He came the way a man comes to a place he respects, with the understanding that presence is not the same as pressure. One evening he sat across from her at Abigail's table while Hope slept in the old woman's arms nearby, and he said, "You don't owe me a direction home." She looked at him. She said, "I know. That's why I can think about choosing one." He waited. She said, "I'm not going back to anything I had before. The claim goes to Hope, and someday that might mean something for her, but I don't want to spend my life looking backward at what Thomas built. I want to build something." Caleb was quiet for a moment. He said, "I've got land, not much. The line shack's on it. I could build onto it. I've been building onto things in my head for years without a reason to do it with my hands." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "If I come back with you, it's not because I need shelter." "I know," he said. She said, "And it's not because Hope needs a father. You offer she'll have a mother who doesn't disappear when things get hard. That's more than most people get." He said, "I know that too." She said, "I'm asking if you understand the difference between a woman who stays because she has nowhere else to go and a woman who stays because she chooses it." He met her eyes. He said, "I understand it. I've been trying to make sure you knew the difference existed before you made up your mind." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Then I'll think about it tonight, and tomorrow you can come back and I'll have an answer." The answer, when she gave it, was yes. He came back in the morning with the horse and a sled rebuilt wider to carry more, and she helped him load it. Abigail stood on her porch with her arms folded and watched them with the expression of someone who knows the ending of a thing and considers it adequate. She said, "Come back in the spring when the pass opens properly. I want to see the child again." June said, "You'll see her." Abigail looked at Caleb. She said, "Code and keep Lanai." He nodded. He knew what she meant. This time he had arrived in time. The journey back was slower than the one out, and quieter and entirely different in a way that had nothing to do with the snow or the wind or the slope of the pass. June rode on the horse with Hope tucked inside her coat, and Caleb walked beside them. And the world was very white and very still and full of the particular kind of silence that follows the end of something long and hard. When they came into the clearing where the line shack sat, she saw that in the days he had been coming and going, he had done something small and deliberate. The cradle was just inside the door, visible through the window, moved to a different spot. The place of honor near the hearth that had been empty for 7 years. He had finished the last edge of it, sanded it smooth, left the burned mark on one side because she had told him to leave it. It was the first thing she carried Hope to when they went inside. She set her daughter in it, and the wood received the weight without complaint. Spring came slowly, as it always does in Montana, working its way up from the creek beds first, then the south-facing slopes, then finally up into the flats where the snow was thickest and most stubborn. The line shack changed with it. A second room went up through March and April, framed in green timber that Caleb cut and June stacked, and together they notched into place on the cold mornings while Hope slept in the warm inside. The cradle migrated to the new room when it was done. A rocking chair appeared that Caleb built from memory and from a pattern he had been carrying in his head for longer than he could say. There was no ceremony. There was no crowd. One afternoon in early May, with the snow retreating up the mountain and the first columbines opening in the south meadow, small and stubborn, purple and white, pushing up through the last of the cold, Caleb said, "I've been wanting to ask you something for a while." She looked at him from where she was kneeling in the dirt with her hands in the earth, turning it for a kitchen garden. He said, "I know you came back of your own choosing. I know you don't need this land or this house or anything that's mine." He paused. "I'd like to make it yours, not the way the things get made yours when someone decides it for you. The other way." He did not dress it up. He was not a man who dressed things up. She looked at him for a long time, this man who had followed her blood in the snow and carried her out of a ravine and stood at the door of a town hall without asking to stand in front of her. This man who had moved a cradle 2 feet toward a fire because she said it was a door and not a grave. She said, "If you're asking me to stay, I have to tell you I'm already staying." He said, "I know. I'm asking if you'll let me stay with you." She got up from the dirt and wiped her hands on her skirt. She said, "Yes." Reverend Creel from the settlement at Wolf Crossing came the following Sunday. Abigail made the ride from the other side of the pass, complaining about her knees the entire way. The judge had passed back through the week before and left his good wishes in a letter that Caleb kept in the Bible. The wedding was held outside, at the edge of the meadow where the columbines had finished opening. Hope sat in Abigail's arms and watched with the expression of a child who is not quite sure what is happening, but approves of the general atmosphere. Creel said the words. They said the words back. When he was done, Caleb kissed her, one moment brief and certain, more arrival than anything else, more the feeling of a thing that has finally completed its journey than anything beginning. She kept her eyes open. That autumn, June cut the old coat apart. Her mother's coat, the one that had not closed over her belly, the one she had worn through the worst night of her life and that had never quite recovered. She cut it carefully, saving the good sections of wool, discarding what had gone beyond repair. She made a blanket for Hope, not because the coat deserved to be unmade, because the things we carry can be remade into something the next person can use, because some survivals are complete enough to be transformed. Hope grew the way children grow in places where they are allowed to, without apology, without permission, toward the light. By winter she was pulling herself up on the cradle's edge and regarding the world with the expression of someone who has plans. The line shack sat at the foot of the slope where the columbines grew every spring. Caleb had carved their name into the porch beam the week after the wedding, small and even, not because it needed to be said, but because some things are worth saying in wood. June Turner Hale had once been valued at $40 in a clearing she had not chosen to stand in. The man who set that price had understood neither her nor what she carried, and that failure was entirely his, not hers. She had run through the snow toward nothing but the dark, with rope on her wrists and blood in her boot, and a child who had not yet been born kicking against the inside of her and saying, loudly and without any possibility of argument, that there was more to come. There had been more. There was still more, stacking up quietly against the days, woodcut, soil-turned, small hands on the edge of a cradle, the sound of someone moving through a house without needing to announce themselves because they belong in it. Caleb Ross had never once treated the finding of her as a debt she owed him. He had treated it the way you treat a road you walk together, not as something to hold over the other person, but as the path that got you both to where you are now. And that, in the end, was the whole of it, not the rescue, not the $40 or the rope or the ravine or the long cold miles through the storm. All of that was real and all of it mattered. But what lasted, what the years added to rather than subtracted from, was this. A woman who had been sold like a possession chose every day to stay. And the man beside her understood that each day's choosing was the only gift worth having, and that to ask for more than that was to have missed the point entirely. Some things are not given. They are chosen, one morning at a time, for as many mornings as there are to come. Thank you for watching. This channel is no longer supported by ads, and these stories continue because people believe they matter. Patreon is a quiet way to support the work with early access, story previews, and small moments of input before each tale told. On screen now is a preview of the Patreon page. If you'd like to support the channel, the invitation is in the first pinned comment down below. I'll see you in the next story.